winding country road stretched endlessly through fields of dry corn and sagging barns. Jessie and Mark, a couple in their late 20s, were eager for a weekend getaway far from city noise. Their GPS had died miles ago, leaving only the paper directions printed from the guest house's old website. "Are you sure this place even exists?" Mark muttered as the tires kicked up gravel dust. Jessie squinted at the road sign. It was weathered and barely legible. Hollow Creek Guest House. Established. 1891. They pulled up to a sagging Victorian farmhouse surrounded by crooked trees and silence so deep it pressed against their ears. The shutters hung loose, and the wood siding was chipped pale grey. Despite the decay, a sign out front declared, "Vacancy." An elderly woman in a faded shawl appeared at the door. Her face was wrinkled, her smile thin. "You must be Jessie and Mark," she said. "Welcome. Dinner's at 6. Your room is ready upstairs." Inside, the house smelled of dust, candle wax, and something faintly metallic. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following every move. The hallway creaked under their steps. Their room had an iron bed, a cracked mirror, and a single oil lamp on the dresser. Jessie touched the quilt. It was cold, damp almost, like it hadn't been washed in years. That evening, the hostess, Mrs. Hale, served stew at a long dining table set for more guests. But Jessie noticed only 2 chairs had been placed. "Do you usually have many travelers?" Jessie asked. Mrs. Hale smiled. "Always." Later that night, Jessie awoke to footsteps pacing the hall. Heavy boots, slow, deliberate. She shook Mark, but he brushed it off. Old house, creaks. Yet Jessie swore she heard a man's voice whisper, "Welcome home." The next morning, Jessie explored the upstairs corridor. Every door was unlocked, except one at the far end. The knob was rusted, scratched, as if someone had clawed at it from inside. At breakfast, she asked Mrs. Hale about the door. The old woman's face stiffened. "That room is not for guests. Best you keep away," Jessie pressed, but Mrs. Hale ignored her, humming an old hymn instead. That night, the footsteps returned, this time stopping at their door. The knob rattled. Jessie held her breath. Slowly, the rattling stopped, replaced by faint scratching, like nails dragging across wood. When she dared peek into the hallway, the locked door at the end now stood slightly open. Curiosity pulled Jessie and Mark toward the forbidden room. Inside was a small bedroom with peeling wallpaper, a rocking chair, and a broken crib. On the wall, words were scratched over and over. "She never left. She never left. She never left." Suddenly, the chair rocked violently. A cold draft swept through. Jessie screamed as a figure, a tall man with a shadowed face, appeared in the mirror and stepped forward, only to vanish when Mark switched on his flashlight. That night, they locked their door. But Jessie dreamed of a boy crying, his hands reaching through the crib bars, begging, "Don't leave me here." The following day, Jessie confronted Mrs. Hale. "I saw the room." "Who lived there?" Mrs. Hale's eyes filled with tears. "My brother Jacob. He died here when we were children. The house, it never let him go." Jessie pressed for details. Mrs. Hale whispered that Jacob had vanished in 1901. The same night, 3 travelers were found dead in their beds. His body was never discovered. Since then, the house demanded guests to keep him company. Mark laughed nervously. "So this is just a ghost story to scare tourists, right?" But that night, their door opened by itself, and muddy boot prints appeared across the floor, leading to the bed. At midnight, Jessie awoke to the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of the bed. She saw the quilt sink under invisible weight. Mark turned on the lamp. Nothing there. Then the mirror across the room fogged up, and words slowly formed as if traced by a finger. "Stay." They bolted for the hallway, but all the doors had disappeared. Where there were once guest rooms, now only endless wallpaper stretched in both directions. The house had shifted. Behind them, footsteps thundered closer. Jessie turned, only to see a boy, pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow. He whispered, "He's coming." A tall figure emerged from the shadows, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. His face was obscured, but his hands dripped black liquid that stained the floorboards. The boy screamed and vanished. The man's voice boomed, "Guests must never leave." They ran. Hallways twisted endlessly until they stumbled into the locked room again. This time, the crib was full, stuffed with bones, brittle and yellowed. The rocking chair creaked as if invisible hands pushed it. The door slammed shut. A low growl filled the air. Mark pounded the walls, but Jessie saw something worse. The portraits in the hall were no longer of strangers. They were of her and Mark, painted in 19th century clothing. They finally burst into the front parlor. The door was in sight, but standing in front of it was Mrs. Hale. "You shouldn't have gone into his room," she said, voice shaking. "Now he'll never let you go." Mark pushed past her, yanking the front door open. Cold night air swept in, and they bolted to the car. The engine roared to life, but the driveway seemed endless, the road stretching longer and longer, no matter how fast they drove. In the rearview mirror, Jessie saw the guest house shrinking in the distance, then suddenly reappearing, closer than before. Mark screamed. The car spun out, and when they stopped, they were back in front of the guest house porch. Mrs. Hale stood waiting, holding a lantern. "I told you, guests must always return." Inside again, the boy appeared, crying. Jessie knelt. "What do you want from us?" The boy whispered, "He keeps me here. He keeps everyone. Don't let him." Before he could finish, the man in the hat seized him, dragging him into darkness. The boy's screams echoed as the door slammed shut. Mrs. Hale collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "Every generation, the house demands new souls. I've fed it all my life. But now, it wants you." Jessie clutched Mark's hand. The walls began to bleed, the lamps flickered out, and the house itself seemed to breathe. The next morning, Hollow Creek Guest House stood quiet again. Mrs. Hale greeted new travelers arriving in their SUV, smiling warmly. "Dinner at 6, rooms are ready." On the upstairs landing, 2 new portraits had been hung, of Jessie and Mark, their faces forever frozen in oil paint, eyes following the living. And in the locked room, the rocking chair swayed as a boy's whisper carried through the halls. "Welcome home."